In a courtroom where a single, life-altering verdict shattered an innocent dream, a desperate call from a wronged teenager to his estranged father sparks a hidden revolution that could upend an entire corrupt system. The courtroom was shrouded in a heavy silence that seemed to press in on every soul present, as if the very air anticipated the irreversible blow about to be dealt. In that moment, the fate of a young man, a beacon of promise and potential, was sealed not by the weight of truth, but by the crushing hand of injustice. Marcus Johnson, barely 17 and already burdened with dreams far grander than the confines of his circumstances, sat with eyes wide and uncomprehending before the imposing figure of Judge Franklin. This was no ordinary trial. It was a spectacle where life and hope were arbitrarily tossed aside by a system marred by bias and cruelty. The judge's voice, devoid of any warmth or compassion, reverberated against the cold stone walls of the courthouse. With each word, the sentence grew heavier, a relentless drumbeat of finality. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Those words, spoken as if reciting a predetermined fate rather than the outcome of a fair trial, echoed in the hearts of all who listened. In that moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath, a collective gasp caught between disbelief and despair. Marcus, whose every day had been a quiet celebration of life's subtle beauties, now found himself condemned by the very instruments meant to protect him. He had always been a gentle observer of the world, a boy whose sketchbook brimmed with the unspoken stories of his neighborhood, the fleeting emotions of passers-by, and the hidden hues of ordinary days. Each delicate line and shadow in his drawings carried an unvoiced testimony of hope and resilience. Yet on this fateful day, that hope was overshadowed by an incomprehensible injustice. Marcus's mind raced, a whirlwind of memories colliding with the brutal reality of his situation. The laughter of friends in a sunlit park, the encouraging smile of a teacher, and the simple joy of capturing a sunset on paper. All of these were now locked away behind bars, replaced by the stark, unforgiving chill of a lifetime sentence. Amid the overwhelming despair, a singular thought emerged, fragile yet potent, a desperate need for help, a call that would cut through the cacophony of despair and echo with the resonance of both sorrow and resolve. With trembling fingers and a heart pounding like the distant rumble of a coming storm, Marcus reached into the inner recesses of his battered jacket and dialed a number etched into his memory by a bond as old as time itself. On the other end of that line waited David Johnson, his estranged father and the U.S. Attorney General, a man whose life had been defined by the relentless pursuit of justice, yet whose personal sacrifices had cost him the warmth of familial love. The connection was instantaneous, the line humming with an urgency that belied the distance between them. Marcus's voice, barely more than a whisper laden with both fear and fragile hope, broke through the static. "Dad, please help me." And in that plea lay the raw essence of a child's vulnerability and a soul yearning to be rescued from a fate too cruel to be justified. David, ensconced in the imposing solitude of his high-rise office in Washington, D.C., felt a sudden, jarring shift within him, a wrenching collision between duty and the long-forgotten memories of home. For years, his existence had been a relentless march toward professional success, a pursuit that demanded sacrifices he could no longer count. Now, confronted with the anguished cry of his son, he was forced to reckon with the cost of every decision that had distanced him from the life he once cherished. In that charged moment, the sterile corridors of power and the cold logic of legal proceedings paled in comparison to the palpable, undeniable pulse of familial love. David's eyes, accustomed to the unwavering resolve required by his office, now shimmered with an emotion long suppressed: remorse, longing, and a fierce determination to make amends. The words of his son resonated deeply, stirring memories of a time when family was not sacrificed on the altar of ambition, when every small victory was shared with those who loved him unconditionally. Outside the courthouse, the city of Chicago, its skyline etched against a twilight sky, bore witness to a paradox of beauty and brutality. This city, celebrated for its artistic heritage and resilient spirit, had long been a microcosm of America's contradictions. Here, amidst the vibrant murals and bustling streets, lived a community that thrived on hope, yet was all too familiar with the scars of systemic injustice. It was a place where the dreams of countless young souls were both nurtured and brutally stifled by a system that too often prioritized expediency over equity. And now, Marcus's story, a tale of unyielding promise marred by a miscarriage of justice, was about to become a symbol of that very struggle, a rallying cry for those who believed that every innocent life deserved to shine. As the gavel fell and the courtroom erupted in a chorus of murmurs and stifled sobs, the stark contrast between the cold finality of the verdict and the warmth of human potential became undeniable. Every face in the room, from the weary eyes of the jurors to the disbelieving glances of onlookers, reflected a single, haunting question. How could a system so steeped in power and privilege allow such a profound error to occur? In that charged silence, the seed of rebellion was sown, a spark of defiance that, once ignited, would challenge the very foundations of the established order. Within the oppressive confines of a prison cell later that day, Marcus's thoughts swirled in a vortex of despair and resolute determination. The cold, unyielding walls that now confined him could never contain the vibrancy of his inner world, the world of colors, emotions, and dreams that had always been his true refuge. In the quiet darkness, illuminated only by the weak glow of a barred window, he clutched the memory of that desperate phone call, its echo a lifeline in the overwhelming sea of hopelessness. The faint sound of his father's voice, full of a newfound tenderness and an urgent promise to set things right, reverberated in his mind, lending him the strength to endure. This was not just the story of a wrongful conviction. It was the prelude to an epic battle against a deeply flawed system, a narrative that would unravel layer by layer the intricate web of corruption, bias, and neglect. It was a call to action, an invitation to witness the transformation of a broken man into a champion of justice, and a plea for a society to awaken to the silent cries of its most vulnerable citizens. Marcus's plight, ignited by the spark of his artistic soul and the desperate plea for help, was about to set in motion events that would reach far beyond the confines of a single courtroom. The undercurrents of fate were stirring in every corner of that great city. In the neighborhoods where children played amidst the echoes of struggle and hope, whispers of Marcus's story began to spread like wildfire. In small, crowded coffee shops and sprawling urban parks, people spoke of the injustice, their voices rising in unison with a blend of anger and sorrow. Murals of his face, rendered in bold, expressive strokes, began to appear on walls as if by magic, a visual testament to a life unjustly condemned yet not forgotten. Each mural was not just an image, but a story, a silent narrative of resilience that demanded to be seen and heard. For the citizens of Chicago and beyond, Marcus's story became an emblem of the cost of indifference, a stark reminder that behind every statistic of wrongful conviction lay a human being with dreams, talents, and a heart full of hope. His art, once a private indulgence and a quiet celebration of life's transient beauty, now held the power to challenge the status quo. Each sketch was a declaration that truth and beauty could triumph even in the face of overwhelming adversity. In the midst of this unfolding drama, the call from Marcus echoed like a beacon, a desperate plea that reverberated through the corridors of power and into the hearts of those who had long yearned for change. David Johnson, awakened from his long slumber of bureaucratic detachment, felt a stirring of conviction that he could no longer ignore. The very foundations of his identity, built on years of duty and sacrifice, trembled under the weight of the responsibility that now lay before him. The message was clear. The time for indifference had passed, and the era of active, impassioned reform had dawned. In that singular, life-altering moment, as father and son were linked by the invisible thread of a desperate phone call, a journey began. A journey that would traverse the darkest alleys of corruption and lead, with unwavering resolve, to the very heart of truth. Marcus's silence in the courtroom, his eyes reflecting both the raw agony of injustice and the unyielding spark of hope, became a silent manifesto against a system that had long forsaken the principles it claimed to uphold. Every heartbeat in that suffocating cell was a reminder of the fragility of life and the indomitable strength of the human spirit. It was a moment suspended in time, a moment when a young man, armed only with his art and a plea for justice, dared to challenge the forces that sought to erase his existence. And as the night deepened and the stars peered down through the narrow window, there was an unspoken promise in the air, a promise that the struggle for redemption was just beginning, and that no matter how deep the darkness, the light of truth would eventually prevail. Thus, beneath the somber facade of a system that had once seemed impenetrable, a quiet revolution was set in motion. The story of Marcus Johnson, etched in every line of his art and every whispered plea for help, was destined to become a catalyst for change, a change that would not only redefine justice, but also rekindle the hope that had long lain dormant in the hearts of those who believed in the transformative power of truth. In that profound, heart-rending moment, the stage was set for an epic journey, a journey that would test the limits of human endurance, challenge the very fabric of an unjust system, and ultimately illuminate the path toward a future where every innocent life is cherished and every voice, no matter how small, is heard. The system that once promised impartial justice was now being exposed as a labyrinth of hidden biases and manipulated evidence, a truth gradually emerging through the persistent efforts of a determined few. In the aftermath of an unjust verdict, the dark underbelly of the judicial process began to unravel, revealing a pattern of systemic misconduct that stretched across courts and cities. It was not enough to accept the surface-level narratives presented by polished legal documents and official statements. A deeper investigation was necessary to uncover how evidence could be twisted, how procedures could be subverted, and how lives could be shattered by a process designed to protect the innocent. At the heart of this inquiry was Evelyn Carter, a seasoned court clerk whose meticulous nature and unwavering integrity had made her a quiet guardian of the truth for many years. Long before the case of Marcus Johnson had ignited national outrage, Evelyn had observed subtle inconsistencies in case files, noticed that witness statements were hurried and sometimes carelessly recorded, and understood that there was a disturbing trend in the way evidence was handled in cases involving young minority defendants. Her keen eyes had long seen patterns that others, blinded by routine, had chosen to ignore. Now, with the wrongful conviction of Marcus, a bright, talented youth with an unfulfilled artistic promise, Evelyn felt compelled to document every discrepancy with painstaking care. Working out of a modest, cluttered office in Washington, D.C., Evelyn and a dedicated team of legal professionals began a thorough review of dozens of case files spanning several years. Their investigation was driven by a shared belief that behind every error in the system lay not just a mistake, but a deliberate effort to expedite convictions and silence voices that did not fit a predetermined narrative. They pored over internal memos, scrutinized digital records, and compared the details of cases that had seemingly similar circumstances but dramatically different outcomes. As the team compiled evidence, it became increasingly clear that the injustice Marcus had suffered was emblematic of a larger, insidious problem, a system that allowed the manipulation of digital evidence to pass unnoticed and unchecked. One of the most damning revelations came from the digital forensic analysis conducted by Lydia Chen, a brilliant expert whose work with cutting-edge technology had already revolutionized the way digital evidence was scrutinized. Lydia discovered that the surveillance footage used in Marcus's trial bore unmistakable signs of tampering. The metadata, which should have provided an unaltered record of time and location, was riddled with anomalies that suggested unauthorized access and subtle editing. The footage, once thought to be a straightforward piece of objective evidence, was in fact a manipulated narrative crafted by those with the power and means to alter its message. In her detailed report, Lydia demonstrated how slight discrepancies in the shadows, the movement of objects in the background, and unexpected gaps in the digital timestamps pointed to the work of a third-party firm. This firm, identified as Vertex Digital Solutions, had been contracted to maintain the court's digital archives, a fact that raised serious questions about conflict of interest and oversight. As Lydia presented her findings, the gravity of the situation became undeniable. The tampering was not an isolated incident. It was part of a broader pattern in which the manipulation of evidence was used as a tool to secure convictions swiftly and decisively, particularly against those who lacked the resources to fight back. Evelyn's dossier, growing steadily with detailed annotations and side-by-side comparisons of original and altered files, painted a picture of a system that was willing to sacrifice the truth for the sake of expediency. Her colleagues, including Samuel Ortiz, a passionate civil rights attorney who had spent his career fighting for the marginalized, were moved by the realization that Marcus's case was not a singular misfortune but the visible tip of a hidden iceberg of corruption. Samuel, whose own experiences had taught him the devastating effects of systemic bias, spoke often of the countless families left devastated by wrongful convictions. He recounted stories of friends and acquaintances whose lives had been derailed by rushed trials and questionable forensic practices. For Samuel, every piece of evidence in Marcus's file was a call to arms, a reminder that justice could only be truly served if the system itself was held accountable for its failures. With his fiery passion and compelling legal arguments, he rallied other like-minded attorneys to join the cause, each determined to expose the flaws that had allowed such an injustice to occur. The investigation soon expanded beyond the sterile walls of government offices and courtrooms, spilling over into the public arena where community voices demanded change. In neighborhoods across Chicago, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and New York, ordinary citizens began to share their own stories of injustice, adding personal testimonies to the growing chorus that the system was failing them. In small community centers and over cups of coffee in crowded diners, families recounted how loved ones had been caught in the gears of a biased machine, a machine that prioritized statistics over human lives, speed over accuracy, and prejudice over the truth. In one particularly moving instance, a community art project emerged as a symbol of resistance. Inspired by Marcus's own artistry and the visual power of his story, local artists in a rundown neighborhood of Brooklyn transformed an abandoned building's wall into a sprawling mural. The mural depicted a vibrant tapestry of faces, each one representing a victim of judicial neglect, with eyes that spoke of pain but also of an indomitable hope. The project, titled Voices of the Voiceless, became a local landmark and a rallying cry for justice reform, drawing the attention of both residents and media alike. It was a powerful reminder that art, in its purest form, had the ability to transcend the darkness and inspire a renewed commitment to truth. Meanwhile, the investigative team continued to collect and analyze evidence with an intensity born of moral imperative. Late into the night, in a quiet office lit only by the soft glow of computer screens and the steady hum of printers, Evelyn meticulously recorded every anomaly, every irregularity, with a precision that bordered on the obsessive. Each new piece of data added weight to the case against a system that had long operated without transparency. As Evelyn compiled her report, she cross-referenced data from seemingly disparate cases, revealing that the pattern of manipulated evidence and rushed trials was not only recurring but disproportionately affected minority defendants. The numbers were stark. Young black men, like Marcus, were routinely given harsher sentences, their fates sealed by procedures that left little room for true justice. This stark reality forced a confrontation with uncomfortable truths. The evidence pointed to a network of complicity where digital tampering, selective omission of exculpatory evidence, and hasty judicial proceedings were not anomalies, but standard operating procedures. Every file Evelyn and her team reviewed deepened the understanding that the system had been rigged against those it was meant to protect. With each revelation, the investigators grew more resolute, aware that their work was not merely an academic exercise, but a battle for the very soul of the judicial process. As the investigation gathered momentum, it began to attract attention from outside the legal community. Journalists, initially skeptical of the claims of digital manipulation, found themselves unable to ignore the mounting evidence. Investigative reports began to surface in major newspapers and online platforms, and televised segments brought expert voices into living rooms across the nation. These reports, characterized by their in-depth analysis and heartfelt interviews with affected families, transformed a once obscure legal anomaly into a national scandal. The media coverage sparked debates on the role of technology in the courtroom, the need for independent oversight, and the moral responsibility of those who wielded power within the system. At the same time, digital forensics experts in the private sector began to develop new tools and methodologies aimed at detecting and preventing the kind of tampering that had undermined Marcus's trial. These innovations, driven by a commitment to transparency and accountability, promised to usher in a new era where digital evidence could no longer be easily manipulated. Open source software and community-driven initiatives began to circulate among legal professionals and technologists alike, each contribution a small but significant step toward reclaiming the integrity of the judicial process. The movement was as much about technological advancement as it was about a fundamental shift in the way justice was administered. In the midst of these developments, Samuel Ortiz organized a series of public forums where citizens, activists, and legal experts could come together to discuss the implications of the findings. These meetings, held in community centers in cities like Los Angeles and Philadelphia, were charged with an energy that was both hopeful and determined. Participants shared personal accounts of injustice, debated policy changes, and envisioned a future where the legal system was reformed from within. The forums also served as a training ground for young lawyers and activists, many of whom were inspired to join the fight for systemic change. The collective determination to expose the truth and hold the system accountable was palpable, a unity forged in the crucible of shared pain and an unyielding desire for reform. The investigation also revealed troubling connections between influential figures and the manipulation of evidence. Financial records, internal memos, and confidential emails began to form a mosaic of complicity, implicating not just rogue individuals, but a broader network that spanned from local courts to high-ranking government offices. Vertex Digital Solutions, the tech firm responsible for the maintenance of digital archives, emerged as a central player in this network. Their contracts, awarded without the rigors of competitive bidding, and their subsequent actions raised serious questions about the oversight of the very tools that were meant to safeguard evidence. The revelation that a company with such a significant role could potentially alter crucial footage was a chilling reminder of how technology, when placed in the wrong hands, could become an instrument of injustice. As the layers of corruption were peeled back, the collective consciousness of the nation began to shift. What had once been an isolated incident of a wrongful conviction was now recognized as the manifestation of a deeply entrenched system of bias and manipulation. The efforts of Evelyn, Lydia, Samuel, and countless others had laid bare a disturbing reality, a reality in which every statistic of injustice was underpinned by human lives, dreams, and potential that had been callously disregarded. In the wake of these discoveries, calls for comprehensive reform grew louder. Lawmakers, once hesitant to challenge the status quo, began to draft proposals for sweeping changes to the judicial process. These proposals included measures to increase transparency in digital evidence handling, establish independent oversight committees, and ensure that every case was subjected to rigorous, unbiased review. The momentum of the movement was undeniable, driven by the passion of those who had experienced the devastating consequences of a broken system, and by the unwavering commitment of those determined to build a future where justice was not a privilege but a right. Throughout this tumultuous period, the voices of the community resonated with a powerful blend of sorrow, anger, and hope. In neighborhoods across major cities, mural projects and community art exhibitions emerged as both a form of protest and a celebration of resilience. The creative expressions that adorned the walls of urban landscapes were not merely decorative, they were visual declarations that the injustice inflicted upon innocent lives would not be tolerated. Every brushstroke on a public canvas was a testament to the belief that art had the power to heal wounds and to galvanize communities into action. As Evelyn's investigation continued, every new piece of evidence further solidified the case for systemic change. Detailed reports, meticulously compiled and supported by expert testimony, began to circulate among legal circles and advocacy groups. These documents were more than mere records. They were a clarion call for accountability, urging every individual who believed in the sanctity of justice to stand up and demand a fair system. The work was arduous and often met with resistance from entrenched interests, but the resolve of the team never wavered. They knew that the truth, once illuminated, would be impossible to ignore. In the silent corridors of government buildings and the bustling streets of urban centers, a quiet revolution was taking shape, a revolution that sought to transform the mechanisms of power from within. The evidence uncovered by Evelyn and her colleagues was a stark reminder that the pursuit of justice was an ongoing battle, one that required constant vigilance, innovation, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. It was a battle not only for the rights of individuals like Marcus Johnson, but for the integrity of an entire system that had long operated in the shadows of secrecy and indifference. Ultimately, the investigation into the manipulated evidence and systemic bias was more than an exercise in legal scrutiny. It was a profound exploration of the human spirit's capacity to resist, to question, and to demand a better way. The combined efforts of dedicated professionals, courageous activists, and everyday citizens had begun to expose a reality that had been hidden behind layers of bureaucratic indifference. And as the evidence continued to mount, it became increasingly clear that the time for reform was not tomorrow or next year, but now. In the quiet determination of those who had chosen to challenge the system, there lay an unyielding belief that every innocent life deserved to be seen and valued. The painstaking documentation of every irregularity, every manipulated file, and every biased decision was not an end in itself, but a stepping stone toward a future where justice was truly blind to race, wealth, or circumstance. The collective struggle to expose these injustices was forging a new path, a path where technology, transparency, and a relentless commitment to truth would eventually prevail over corruption and neglect. Thus, in the shadow of monumental injustice, The voices of those who had been silenced for too long rose in unison, demanding that the scales of justice be recalibrated. The investigation, a testament to the tireless work of people like Evelyn Carter, Lydia Chen, and Samuel Ortiz, illuminated not only the flaws within the system, but also the extraordinary potential for change when truth is pursued with unwavering resolve. The journey was far from over, but with every new piece of evidence and every public forum where voices joined together in solidarity, the promise of a fairer, more transparent judicial process grew ever stronger. In the unfolding narrative of systemic corruption, every document, every digital file, and every heartfelt testimony served as a reminder that the fight for justice was a battle for the very soul of society. And as the investigators pressed forward, armed with truth and driven by the unquenchable fire of hope, they set in motion a force that would one day reshape the corridors of power, a force that, regardless of the obstacles ahead, would never allow the light of truth to be extinguished. David Johnson sat in the quiet solitude of his high-rise office in Washington, D.C., his mind reeling with a mixture of regret and determination. For years, he had served as the U.S. Attorney General with unwavering commitment to enforcing the law, a man celebrated for his cold efficiency and impeccable record. Yet the haunting echo of his son Marcus's desperate plea reverberated in his heart, shaking him to his very core. That single phone call had unlocked buried memories of a time when family came before ambition, when the laughter of a child and the warmth of a shared moment were more precious than any professional accolade. Now, as he gazed out over the city's sprawling skyline, he recognized that the injustice inflicted upon Marcus was not an isolated incident, but a damning indictment of a system that had strayed from its noble ideals. In that defining moment, David's hardened exterior began to crumble. The relentless pursuit of power that had once driven him now gave way to an overwhelming need to right a wrong, a need to restore not only his own shattered relationship with his son, but also to mend a broken system that had left too many lives in ruins. With a heart heavy with remorse and eyes open to a painful truth, he resolved to take decisive action. The transformation was subtle at first, a quiet shift in his demeanor, a softness in his tone during confidential meetings with trusted aides. But it was enough to set into motion a journey that would redefine his legacy and ignite a movement across the nation. David began by reaching out to a small circle of reform-minded colleagues and legal experts. Among them were Aaron Miller, a seasoned investigator renowned for his unwavering integrity; Lydia Chen, whose groundbreaking digital forensic work had exposed the tampering that marred Marcus's trial; and Samuel Ortiz, a passionate civil rights attorney whose own personal history with systemic injustice lent his voice a power that resonated with the oppressed. In late-night strategy sessions held in the quiet confines of secure meeting rooms, they laid out plans to investigate every corner of the system that had allowed corruption to flourish. They pored over case files, scrutinized internal memos, and re-examined digital evidence with a newfound resolve to expose the layers of manipulation that had so cruelly sealed Marcus's fate. The first step in David's new crusade was to launch an internal review that would scrutinize not only Marcus's case, but a host of other cases where the system had failed the vulnerable. He ordered an independent audit of digital evidence handling practices, determined to uncover any discrepancies that could explain the stark disparities in sentencing. His office assembled a dedicated task force that worked around the clock, meticulously gathering data and cross-referencing documents. Every anomaly found, every unexplained alteration in the digital records, was added to a growing dossier that painted a damning picture of a system compromised by negligence and deliberate bias. As the investigation gained momentum, the story of Marcus began to transcend the confines of a legal battle and seep into the public consciousness. David's transformation from a detached enforcer of the law to a father driven by personal redemption became a beacon of hope for those who had long suffered under the weight of systemic injustice. News outlets that had once celebrated his professional triumphs now found themselves compelled to cover the emotional journey of a man who was daring to stand against a corrupt system. In intimate interviews, David spoke of his personal awakening with a raw vulnerability that resonated deeply with viewers. He recounted the painful memories of missed birthdays and quiet dinners, of moments when he had chosen duty over love, and expressed a heartfelt desire to mend what had been broken. Across the nation, communities that had been silently bearing the scars of judicial neglect found new strength in David's renewed commitment. In cities like Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, grassroots organizations and local activists began to mobilize. They organized town hall meetings, community forums, and peaceful protests, all united by a common goal: to demand accountability and reform in a system that had long marginalized the innocent. At one such gathering in a modest community center in Los Angeles, a diverse group of citizens came together: young professionals, longtime residents, and even former law enforcement officers, all sharing their personal encounters with injustice. Their testimonies, laced with both sorrow and steely determination, echoed the sentiments that David's own journey had stirred within him. In a series of impassioned speeches broadcast on local television, David laid bare his vision for a reformed justice system, one that placed human dignity at its heart, where every case was subject to thorough scrutiny, and where the voices of the marginalized could finally be heard. He spoke of the need for independent oversight of forensic laboratories, of stringent checks on digital evidence processing, and of mandatory reviews for cases that involved young minority defendants. His proposals were not just technical adjustments, but a call to fundamentally re-examine the moral foundations of a system that had allowed itself to be corrupted by expediency and prejudice. Even as David championed legislative reforms, his personal journey toward redemption continued in the most intimate ways. He sought to rebuild the fractured bond with Marcus, yearning to replace years of silence with open, honest communication. In quiet, candid conversations that took place over long phone calls and cautious, measured meetings, father and son began to bridge the gap that had grown between them. Marcus, still carrying the scars of his wrongful incarceration, found solace in his father's earnest apologies and heartfelt promises. These moments, though painful and fraught with the weight of lost time, were the seeds of healing, a recognition that true justice extended beyond the walls of a courtroom and into the realms of personal redemption. The call to action that had been ignited by Marcus's plight soon evolved into a national movement. As the internal investigation continued to uncover damning evidence of manipulated records and systemic bias, civil rights groups, academic institutions, and grassroots organizers joined forces to push for comprehensive reform. In bustling urban centers, public rallies and vigils were held where the names and faces of those wrongfully convicted were honored. One such gathering, held on the steps of a historic courthouse in Philadelphia, saw thousands of citizens united under a banner of hope and defiance. Their chants, echoing through the city streets, were a declaration that injustice would no longer be tolerated, and that every innocent life was worth fighting for. In the midst of these public demonstrations, new forms of creative expression emerged as powerful tools for social change. Inspired by Marcus's own artistry, community centers organized art therapy workshops and mural projects that celebrated the resilience of the human spirit. In one moving initiative, local artists collaborated to create a massive mosaic on a blank wall in downtown New York. The mosaic depicted a multitude of faces, each one a testament to the untold stories of those who had suffered under a flawed system. The art was a visual call to arms, a reminder that every brushstroke could help restore hope, and every color could symbolize the promise of a fairer, more compassionate future. David's internal transformation and the external outcry for reform converged in a series of high-profile meetings with lawmakers and judicial reform advocates. In hushed, earnest discussions in Washington, D.C., David and his team presented their findings, emphasizing that the manipulation of digital evidence and the systematic bias in sentencing were not isolated failures, but part of a broader pattern that demanded urgent attention. The proposals that emerged from these discussions included measures to overhaul the current system, establishing independent panels to review digital forensic practices, implementing stricter standards for evidence handling, and ensuring that every case received a comprehensive, unbiased examination. The momentum of the movement was palpable, as even those previously resistant to change began to acknowledge the moral imperative for reform. As the nation watched, David's journey became more than a personal quest. It became a symbol of the potential for redemption and transformation within even the most entrenched institutions. His public addresses, delivered with an uncharacteristic vulnerability, struck a chord with audiences across America. In one televised address, he spoke softly yet firmly. I stand before you, not as a man who has always done right, but as a father who has come to understand that justice is not just about enforcing the law, it is about protecting the hearts and hopes of our people. His words, imbued with both contrition and conviction, resonated with those who had long felt ignored by a system that prioritized numbers over narratives. The awakening that swept across the nation was as much about reclaiming lost trust as it was about instituting new safeguards against injustice. In communities long neglected by the legal system, a renewed sense of empowerment took root. Activists and ordinary citizens alike began to see themselves as vital players in the collective effort to restore fairness, a recognition that every individual, regardless of their background, had a stake in shaping a more equitable future. The energy of the movement was infectious, sparking a wave of volunteerism and community engagement that reached deep into the fabric of society. Throughout this tumultuous period, the personal and the political intertwined in ways that redefined the very meaning of justice. David Johnson, once a symbol of detached authority, now embodied the possibility of change, a living testament to the idea that even those who have strayed from the path of compassion can find their way back through acts of courage and humility. His journey from indifference to fervent activism inspired a generation of public servants, lawyers, and community leaders who began to question the status quo and demand accountability from institutions that had long operated without sufficient oversight. As legislative debates unfolded in Capitol Hill, voices from all corners of the country contributed to a chorus calling for a justice system that was as humane as it was effective. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at increasing transparency and accountability in evidence handling, while legal scholars and technologists collaborated on developing innovative solutions to prevent future tampering. The narrative was clear. The time had come to reimagine a system that had once been a sanctuary of justice, but had, over time, become a mechanism for suppressing the innocent. In the midst of this national renaissance, David worked tirelessly to mend the fractured relationship with his son. In quiet moments away from the glare of the public eye, father and son began to forge a tentative bond, a slow, painful, but ultimately hopeful process of reconciliation. Their conversations, filled with shared memories and whispered promises, were a poignant reminder that redemption was not only possible in the corridors of power, but also in the intimate spaces of the heart. The call to action that had been ignited by Marcus's wrongful conviction had now blossomed into a movement that transcended personal narratives. It became a rallying cry for a nation weary of injustice, a declaration that every life, every dream, and every human being deserved the opportunity to flourish without the oppressive weight of systemic bias. The movement was a mosaic of countless voices, each one contributing to a symphony of hope that resonated across communities and echoed in the halls of government. As David Johnson's transformation unfolded, the boundaries between public duty and personal redemption blurred. His determination to expose corruption and to reform the justice system was fueled by the intimate pain of a father's love, a love that, despite years of separation, refused to be extinguished. It was a love that transcended the sterile confines of legal procedures, reaching deep into the essence of what it meant to be human. In his tireless pursuit of justice, David not only sought to vindicate his son, but also to ensure that the sacrifices of all those who had suffered under a flawed system would never be forgotten. The awakening of a nation, sparked by a single father's call to action, was a testament to the enduring power of truth and the unyielding strength of the human spirit. It was a journey that would reshape lives, reform institutions, and ultimately redefine the very meaning of justice in a world where every voice mattered. And as the nation rallied behind the promise of change, the future, once shrouded in darkness, began to glow with the soft, persistent light of hope. In the sterile, hushed atmosphere of the courtroom, where the weight of every spoken word and the slightest gesture held the power to shape destinies, a new chapter in the struggle for justice began to unfold with an intensity that was both heart-wrenching and transformative. Under the compassionate stewardship of Judge Rebecca Lee, a woman known for her steadfast fairness and an unwavering commitment to the truth, a re-examination of Marcus Johnson's case was set in motion. The reopening of the trial was not merely a legal formality. It was an epic battle against entrenched corruption and a testament to the enduring resilience of those who dared to stand for what was right. In this arena of truth, every witness, every piece of evidence, and every moment of vulnerability was laid bare as a critical counterpoint to the injustice that had so long been allowed to fester. The courtroom itself transformed into a stage where the drama of human sacrifice and the struggle for redemption played out before an audience of both skeptical observers and hopeful advocates. Expert witnesses took the stand with a quiet determination, each testimony a carefully crafted thread that, when woven together, began to reveal a tapestry of systemic abuse. Lydia Chen, whose groundbreaking digital forensic work had already unmasked the deliberate tampering of surveillance footage, presented her findings with an analytical clarity that left no room for doubt. She demonstrated, with painstaking detail, how the original recordings had been altered, subtle shifts in light, unexplained gaps in metadata, and the presence of anomalies that could only be attributed to deliberate manipulation. Her words, delivered with both scientific precision and an undercurrent of righteous indignation, resonated deeply within the room, casting a long shadow over the credibility of the evidence that had once condemned Marcus. As Lydia's testimony unfolded, Samuel Ortiz, a civil rights attorney whose voice had long been a rallying cry for the downtrodden, stepped forward to speak of the human cost behind the manipulated evidence. With a fervor born of personal experience and years of fighting systemic injustice, Samuel recounted the harrowing tales of families torn apart by expedited trials and hastily made decisions. He spoke of the countless young lives like Marcus's that had been sacrificed at the altar of a system designed to favor expedience over equity. His words were not mere legal arguments. They were impassioned pleas for a system to remember its duty, to look beyond cold statistics and see the hearts and hopes of the individuals caught in its machinery. Samuel's narrative painted a picture of a deeply flawed process, one that was driven by the relentless pursuit of convictions at the expense of truth and justice. In the midst of this intense courtroom drama, Marcus Johnson himself found the strength to step forward and confront the very system that had once silenced him. Though still burdened by the scars of wrongful conviction and the personal toll of years spent in confinement, Marcus's presence on the witness stand was a revelation, a testament to his inner strength and the quiet power of art as a means of expression. His testimony was measured and poignant. He spoke not in angry outbursts, but in soft, deliberate phrases that carried the weight of his journey. Marcus recalled the moments of isolation in his cell, the nights when the darkness seemed to swallow him whole, and the silent determination that had kept his artistic spirit alive. He spoke of his sketches, which had become his only sanctuary, a visual diary of the beauty he had witnessed and the injustice he had endured. Each word he uttered was laced with a mixture of sorrow and defiant hope, a declaration that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, the human spirit could still rise and create. Beyond the formal proceedings, the trial was a crucible for personal sacrifice, where the toll on every participant was measured not in minutes or hours but in the deep, lasting impact on their souls. David Johnson, once a symbol of authority and detached resolve, sat in the gallery with a pained expression that betrayed the inner turmoil of a father torn between duty and redemption. His eyes, though hardened by years of bureaucratic imperatives, now shimmered with unspoken remorse and a profound desire to set things right. In quiet moments away from the public glare, David's thoughts returned to memories of a lost past, a past where family and justice were intertwined in a delicate balance. The courtroom, in its relentless pursuit of truth, became the battleground where David's own journey of self-forgiveness was fought as he struggled to reconcile the man he had been with the father he longed to become. Every element of the trial was charged with an intensity that made even the most routine procedural moments seem monumental. The presentation of evidence was accompanied by hushed gasps and the rustling of papers, as every detail was scrutinized with an almost sacred reverence. In one particularly poignant moment, the defense introduced a series of handwritten notes provided anonymously by a retired court clerk, a silent witness to the inner workings of Judge Franklin's chamber. These notes, raw and unvarnished, detailed the irregularities in the handling of Marcus's evidence, the unexplained alteration of digital files, the suspicious absence of key witness statements, and the hurried pace at which decisions had been made. The testimony of this anonymous clerk, though delivered indirectly, cut through the courtroom's tension like a knife, forcing even the most skeptical observers to confront the grim reality of a system in crisis. In parallel to the courtroom's heated debates and emotional outpourings, a series of secret meetings had been taking place behind closed doors, clandestine gatherings in historic buildings that had witnessed countless moments of legal deliberation. In one such meeting held in an old federal building in Washington, D.C., a group of legal experts, reform advocates, and even former judges convened to discuss the broader implications of Marcus's case. The atmosphere was somber and charged with the gravity of what was at stake. They discussed innovative strategies to ensure that digital evidence would be handled with the utmost integrity in the future to prevent the kind of manipulation that had so cruelly sealed Marcus's fate. These discussions were not merely academic. They were a clarion call for a fundamental rethinking of the systems and processes that had, for too long, operated in the shadows of complacency and bias. As the trial drew on, the personal sacrifices made by everyone involved became increasingly apparent. Evelyn Carter, whose tireless work had laid the foundation for exposing the system's flaws, was often seen with bags under her eyes, a silent testament to the long nights spent poring over case files and chasing down elusive leads. Her unwavering commitment to the truth came at a steep personal cost, yet she pressed on with a determination that inspired those around her. Her work was a reminder that the battle for justice was not fought solely in the courtroom, but in the quiet moments of perseverance when the world seemed indifferent to the plight of the vulnerable. The courtroom drama reached a crescendo as the defense presented a final, devastating piece of evidence, a digital reconstruction of the surveillance footage that had been so pivotal in Marcus's original conviction. The reconstruction, painstakingly created by Lydia Chen and her team, revealed the subtle inconsistencies that had been deliberately engineered to mislead. Every frame of the video, every shift in shadow and light was analyzed in real time, leaving the audience with a visual narrative that spoke louder than any words. The tension in the room was palpable as the reconstructed footage played on a large screen, its images a powerful indictment of the corruption that had once been hidden behind official statements and sanitized reports. The courtroom fell into a profound silence, each person absorbed by the stark reality that the evidence had so thoroughly undermined the legitimacy of the previous trial. In that silence, the true cost of the battle within became painfully clear. It was not merely a legal struggle, it was an emotional and moral crucible that tested the limits of human endurance. Every witness who took the stand, every piece of tampered evidence laid bare for all to see, was a reminder of the lives that had been upended and the dreams that had been dashed by a system that cared little for individual humanity. Marcus, standing before the jury with his eyes reflecting both the raw pain of his experience and the steady spark of his enduring spirit, embodied that struggle. His presence was a silent testament to the idea that even in the darkest of times, a single voice, no matter how small, could challenge the forces of injustice and demand a reckoning. Outside the confines of the courtroom, the reverberations of the trial were felt deeply by communities across the nation. Families who had once lived in quiet despair began to find hope in the unfolding drama. Public discussions erupted in living rooms, cafes, and community centers, where the details of the trial were dissected with both passion and an unyielding demand for change. The story of Marcus Johnson, once relegated to the margins of bureaucratic indifference, had now become a symbol of resistance, a rallying cry for those who believe that no life should be condemned by a flawed system. For David Johnson, witnessing the trial was a deeply personal ordeal. Each piece of evidence presented, each emotional testimony delivered by his son and the courageous witnesses, pierced through the armor he had once worn so confidently. He felt the heavy burden of every decision he had made, every moment he had chosen duty over love, and each new revelation in the courtroom only deepened his resolve to transform his own legacy. In the moments when the courtroom lights dimmed and the whispers of the crowd faded into a contemplative silence, David's thoughts turned inward, reflecting on the sacrifices required to forge a path toward true justice. His internal battle was as fierce as the external one, a struggle to reconcile the man he had been with the father he longed to become, a man who would no longer allow the cold mechanisms of power to dictate the fate of an innocent soul. As the trial advanced, the personal sacrifices of every participant, witnesses, lawyers, and even those who worked quietly behind the scenes, became woven into the fabric of the proceedings. Each testimony was a brick in the foundation of a movement that sought not only to free Marcus Johnson, but also to ensure that no other young life would be destroyed by the same systemic failings. The sacrifices were both visible and unseen. The sleepless nights of the investigative team, the emotional toll on families who had long lived with the stigma of injustice, and the quiet determination of every individual who had risked their career to speak the truth. These sacrifices were the lifeblood of the battle, a testament to the fact that the pursuit of justice was a cause that demanded both courage and the willingness to endure personal pain for the sake of a greater good. In the charged atmosphere of the courtroom, the drama of the battle within reached its zenith. The final hours of the trial were marked by a series of heart-wrenching exchanges, as attorneys sparred over the nuances of digital evidence and the reliability of key testimonies. The intensity of the debate was matched only by the deep emotional undercurrents that ran through every word spoken and every gesture made. The courtroom, once a cold arena of legal technicalities, had become a crucible where the very soul of the justice system was put to the test, a test that demanded not just legal acumen, but also the capacity to feel, to empathize, and to understand the true cost of every decision made in its name. In that climactic moment, as the weight of all the evidence pressed down on the scales of justice, the room seemed to hold its breath. The testimonies, the reconstructed digital footage, and the raw, unfiltered emotions of those who had suffered under the system converged into a singular, unyielding demand that the truth be acknowledged and that the sacrifices of every innocent life be honored. The battle within the courtroom was not just a legal confrontation, it was a profound human struggle, one that would resonate in the hearts of all who witnessed it and serve as a catalyst for change far beyond the confines of that single room. As the trial drew to a close, the echoes of every sacrifice, every heartfelt testimony, and every tear shed in the pursuit of truth lingered in the air, a solemn reminder that justice, while often delayed and hard fought, was ultimately worth every ounce of courage and every moment of vulnerability. The courtroom, bathed in the soft glow of the fading afternoon light, stood as a silent monument to the enduring spirit of those who had dared to challenge a system that had once seemed impenetrable. And in that moment, as the final words of the proceedings were spoken, it was clear that the battle within had not ended. It had merely transformed into a promise for a future where every voice, every life, and every sacrifice would be remembered, honored, and ultimately vindicated. In a historic courtroom bathed in the soft glow of early morning light, a profound shift in destiny unfolded. After months of relentless investigation, impassioned courtroom battles, and personal sacrifices, justice was finally restored in the case of Marcus Johnson. With unwavering resolve and the weight of undeniable evidence behind her, Judge Rebecca Lee delivered a verdict that would resonate far beyond the confines of that room. In a measured tone filled with both gravity and hope, she declared that Marcus's wrongful conviction was overturned and that his life, once nearly extinguished by systemic failure, was now reborn in the promise of true justice. As the judge's final words echoed, the atmosphere transformed from one of somber expectation to a jubilant, almost sacred celebration of human dignity. For Marcus, the moment was nothing short of miraculous, a deliverance from a darkness that had threatened to erase his dreams. The courtroom, which had once been a battleground of raw pain and disillusionment, now pulsed with an energy that heralded a new dawn. Cameras flashed, and reporters scrambled to capture the historic pronouncement. Yet, amid the clamor, a deep, personal silence enveloped those who had fought so hard for this day. Outside the courthouse, a city awakened to the sound of change. In Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and beyond, streets filled with people whose hearts had been stirred by the monumental victory. Protesters and supporters, many of whom had long lived under the weight of systemic injustice, now gathered in a spontaneous outpouring of unity and hope. Banners and signs bearing Marcus's name were raised high, not as symbols of tragedy, but as emblems of resilience and rebirth. The faces of those who had suffered in silence now shone with renewed determination, their voices rising in unison to declare that justice, once obscured by corruption, had finally been reclaimed. For David Johnson, the transformation was both public and profoundly personal. As he stepped out of the courthouse, his eyes met Marcus's, a moment of unspoken understanding and reconciliation that spoke of lost time and the promise of healing. In that embrace, there was a merging of past sorrows and future hopes, a recognition that even the deepest wounds could begin to mend under the gentle, persistent force of love and truth. David, who had once been seen as the embodiment of detached authority, now appeared before the world as a man redeemed, his soul lightened by the opportunity to make amends not only with his son, but with a society he had long vowed to protect. The triumph in court set off a chain reaction that rippled throughout the nation. The victory was not confined to legal circles. It ignited a broader movement for reform. Legislators, inspired by the clarity of the evidence and the emotional resonance of the case, began to introduce sweeping changes aimed at dismantling the very systems that had allowed injustice to flourish. In Washington, D.C., discussions in the halls of Congress grew impassioned as lawmakers from both sides of the aisle recognized that the time had come to fundamentally reassess the way digital evidence was managed, to ensure that future convictions would be built on truth rather than manipulated narratives. New legislation emerged that sought to standardize protocols for digital forensics and establish independent oversight committees dedicated to auditing evidence handling practices. These proposals were not merely technical adjustments, but a bold reimagining of a justice system that had, for too long, been marred by opacity and bias. Legal scholars and civil rights advocates praise the reforms, which promise to safeguard the rights of every citizen and restore faith in the institutions designed to protect them. The case of Marcus Johnson became a rallying point, a poignant reminder that behind every statistic and every court record lay a human life, fragile and full of potential. Across the country, grassroots organizations seized the moment to amplify the message of reform. In community centers, town hall meetings, and public forums, citizens shared their own experiences of injustice and rallied around the idea that change was not only necessary but inevitable. In a small neighborhood in Los Angeles, a vibrant coalition of activists and artists organized a week-long festival celebrating resilience and renewal. The event, held in a repurposed warehouse, featured live music, interactive art installations, and panel discussions that bridged the gap between legal expertise and everyday experience. Residents took to the streets, their voices raised in chants that echoed the sentiment of the day, that every individual deserved a fair chance at life, free from the chains of systemic prejudice. One striking initiative was the launch of a mentorship program designed to guide at-risk youth through the transformative power of art and education. Inspired by Marcus's own journey, the program paired aspiring young artists with established mentors who not only nurtured their creative talents, but also instilled in them a sense of self-worth and resilience. In neighborhoods that had long been marginalized, community leaders organized art workshops and public exhibitions where the voices of the disenfranchised could be heard in bold, colorful strokes. These projects, which range from mural paintings on derelict walls to interactive digital showcases in local libraries, served as powerful reminders that the spirit of a community could never be silenced, even by the darkest of times. As the movement for reform gathered momentum, David Johnson found himself increasingly at the center of a national conversation about the true meaning of justice. His speeches, once marked by a bureaucratic detachment, now overflowed with emotion and personal conviction. In a particularly moving address before a joint session of Congress, he spoke of his transformation with a vulnerability that captivated the audience. Today, we are not just correcting a mistake in one courtroom, he declared, his voice resonating with quiet power. We are redefining what it means to pursue justice. We are choosing to honor every human life, to see the person behind the case number, and to ensure that our system reflects the highest ideals of compassion and truth. His words, simple yet profound, struck a chord with a nation hungry for accountability and reform. The impact of the restored justice in Marcus's case extended far beyond the courtroom. It became a catalyst for cultural transformation, inspiring a wave of artistic and social innovation. In New York, a coalition of theater companies and digital media producers collaborated on a groundbreaking documentary that chronicled the journey from wrongful conviction to vindication. The film interwove interviews with legal experts, emotional testimonies from families affected by injustice, and breathtaking scenes of urban art and protest. Premiering at a renowned film festival, the documentary ignited discussions in academic halls, boardrooms, and living rooms alike, challenging audiences to confront the harsh realities of a system that had once failed so many. Simultaneously, educational institutions across the country began to integrate the lessons of the case into their curricula. Law schools introduced new courses on digital forensics and ethical evidence management, while art academies celebrated Marcus's journey as a testament to the power of creative expression in the face of adversity. Students, inspired by the narrative of transformation and resilience, engaged in passionate debates and research projects that explored the intersections of technology, law, and human rights. This academic renaissance not only equipped a new generation of professionals with the tools to safeguard against injustice, but also instilled in them a deep-seated belief that every individual had a role to play in building a fairer society. In the wake of the historic verdict, communities and institutions alike began to reimagine what a just future could look like. Independent legal clinics sprang up, offering pro bono services to those who had been wrongfully convicted, and a wave of new nonprofit organizations emerged dedicated to reforming the justice system from within. These organizations, often led by survivors of systemic injustice, work tirelessly to provide legal support, counseling, and advocacy for marginalized communities. Their efforts, born out of personal experience and a collective desire for change, further underscored the transformative power of grassroots activism. For Marcus Johnson, the journey toward a new beginning was marked by both liberation and profound introspection. The moment he stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of his past began to lift, replaced by the invigorating promise of a future where his talent and resilience could flourish. In the months that followed, Marcus dedicated himself to using his art as a vehicle for social change. He organized public exhibitions that showcased his journey, not just as a victim of injustice, but as a beacon of hope and a symbol of human perseverance. His work, imbued with the raw emotions of his experience, resonated deeply with audiences, inspiring countless others to believe in the possibility of redemption and transformation. As Marcus's art began to gain recognition, it also sparked a broader cultural dialogue about the role of creativity in healing and reform. His sketches, once confined to the margins of a prison cell, were now displayed in galleries, community centers, and even on the walls of public buildings. Each piece of art told a story of pain, struggle, and ultimately, the triumph of the human spirit. Through his art, Marcus communicated a universal message that even in the face of overwhelming injustice, hope could emerge, and every soul had the capacity to rise, rebuild, and inspire change. In the years that followed, the legacy of Marcus Johnson's case continued to influence national policy and public sentiment. The reforms initiated in the wake of the trial not only improved the procedures for handling digital evidence and ensuring unbiased trials, but also fostered a culture of transparency and accountability that permeated every level of the justice system. David Johnson, once burdened by the guilt of a broken system, became a leading advocate for judicial reform. His efforts, which were rooted in the painful lessons of his personal journey, helped to establish independent oversight bodies and spearheaded initiatives that ensured every case was scrutinized with the utmost integrity. His transformation from a distant enforcer of the law to a compassionate champion of justice became an enduring symbol of what was possible when accountability and empathy converged. The profound changes that swept through the system sparked a new era of hope and transformation, a time when the collective voice of a nation demanded that every individual, regardless of race or circumstance, be afforded the opportunity to thrive. This awakening was reflected not only in legislative halls and courtrooms, but also in the everyday lives of people across the country. In neighborhoods once defined by despair, vibrant community projects and educational programs emerged as living testaments to the power of renewal. Mentorship programs, art therapy workshops, and civic engagement initiatives flourished, providing the tools and opportunities for young people to pursue their dreams and reclaim their futures. In this era of transformation, the narrative of Marcus Johnson and the tireless efforts of those who had fought for him became a guiding light, a reminder that the pursuit of justice was an ever-evolving journey, one that required constant vigilance, courage, and an unwavering commitment to truth. As communities and institutions embraced the reforms, the story of that fateful day in the courtroom became more than just a singular victory. It evolved into a legacy of hope that inspired countless others to believe that change was not only possible, but inevitable. The tapestry of this new dawn was woven from the threads of redemption, unity, and the relentless spirit of those who refused to be silenced. In the renewed light of justice, every voice mattered, every sacrifice was honored, and every act of courage, no matter how small, contributed to a collective movement that reshaped the nation's future. The restored justice in Marcus's case served as a powerful catalyst, a call to action that reverberated across generations, urging each individual to stand up for what was right and to participate in the ongoing quest for a more equitable society. In the end, the transformation of a broken system into one that recognized the inherent dignity of every human life was a story of redemption and hope, a story that would continue to inspire and challenge all who encountered it. It was a reminder that while the journey toward justice is often fraught with hardship and sacrifice, it is also a testament to the unyielding resilience of the human spirit. And as the nation moved forward, emboldened by the promise of a brighter future, the legacy of that historic day endured, a legacy that would forever remind us that, in the face of overwhelming darkness, the light of truth and compassion can restore justice and transform lives. In reflecting upon the journey of Marcus Johnson, a young artist whose life was nearly extinguished by the cruelty of a broken system, we see a narrative that is as harrowing as it is inspiring. Marcus's story began in the oppressive silence of a courtroom, where a harsh verdict was pronounced by a judge whose unyielding determination to uphold a flawed system resulted in a life sentence for an innocent teenager. Despite being caught in the vice of injustice, Marcus held on to the light of his creative spirit. His sketches, filled with gentle observations and deep emotions, became both his refuge and his silent rebellion against the forces that sought to erase his identity. As the weight of the wrongful conviction pressed down on him, Marcus's desperate call for help reached far beyond the cold walls of the prison cell. That call, uttered in a trembling voice, rippled through the corridors of power and struck a chord in the heart of David Johnson, the U.S. Attorney General and Marcus's estranged father. In that pivotal moment, a transformation began. David, who had long sacrificed family warmth for professional ambition, was forced to confront the personal cost of his detachment. The anguish in Marcus's plea stirred within him a resolve to not only seek personal redemption by mending their fractured relationship, but also to challenge the very system that had condemned his son. David's transformation sparked a broader awakening across the nation. His commitment to investigating the corruption that had manipulated evidence and bypassed the truth resonated deeply with legal experts, civil rights advocates, and everyday citizens. Together, they unraveled the dark threads of systemic injustice that had woven a web of bias, prejudice, and neglect. This investigation not only exposed the deliberate tampering and manipulation within the judicial system, but also united disparate communities, those who had long been silenced by oppression, and those who believed that every innocent life deserved dignity and fairness. The courtroom, Once a cold arena of bureaucratic indifference, transformed into a stage where truth was fought for with every piece of evidence presented. Under the empathetic gaze of Judge Rebecca Lee, the reopened trial of Marcus Johnson became an epic battle for justice. Expert testimonies detailed the minute yet damning inconsistencies in the tampered digital evidence. Witnesses, people who had been overlooked by a flawed system, stepped forward with stories of hardship and loss, their voices merging into a powerful declaration that the status quo was no longer acceptable. Throughout this turbulent period, Marcus emerged as more than a victim of injustice. He evolved into a symbol of resilience and hope. Despite enduring years of isolation and the emotional scars of wrongful imprisonment, Marcus found the strength to express his truth through his art. His drawings, once a private sanctuary, now spoke to thousands, igniting conversations about redemption, personal strength, and the need for systemic change. His creative spirit reminded everyone that even in the darkest moments, beauty and truth could flourish, transforming despair into a powerful message of hope. The sweeping reforms that followed, spurred by grassroots activism, passionate legal advocacy, and David Johnson's own heartfelt transformation, redefined the face of justice in a nation desperate for change. New legislation was enacted to ensure transparency in digital forensics and to establish independent oversight of the judicial process. These changes, while born of a singular tragedy, promise to safeguard countless lives from the errors of a corrupted system. The legacy of Marcus's struggle, interwoven with the personal redemption of his father, became a beacon for future generations. A reminder that every life is valuable and that the pursuit of justice is a sacred duty that transcends individual ambition. From this profound narrative, we can extract several deep lessons that are as relevant today as they were in the moments of Marcus's and David's transformation. First and foremost, the story teaches us about the indomitable strength of the human spirit. Even when faced with the most overwhelming adversity, hope and creativity can be powerful tools to reclaim one's identity and advocate for change. Marcus's art is not just a personal outlet, it is a testament to the resilience that resides in all of us. In our daily lives, whether we are confronted with personal challenges or systemic obstacles, we must remember that every act of creativity, every small moment of hope, can contribute to a larger movement toward positive change. Another critical lesson is the importance of compassion and connection in overcoming isolation and injustice. David Johnson's journey from a detached enforcer of the law to a caring father and passionate advocate for reform reminds us that true justice is not achieved solely through legal victories or policy changes. It is built on the foundations of empathy, understanding, and a commitment to the well-being of others. In our own lives, nurturing meaningful relationships and staying connected with those we love can empower us to face challenges head on, transforming personal pain into collective strength. Furthermore, this story underlines the value of courage in the pursuit of truth. The willingness of individuals like Evelyn Carter, Lydia Chen, and Samuel Ortiz to risk their careers and personal safety to expose corruption demonstrates that the path to justice is often fraught with difficulties, but it is a journey worth undertaking. Their perseverance teaches us that standing up for what is right, even when the odds are stacked against us, is essential for the betterment of society. It is a call to action for each of us to question the systems around us, to demand accountability, and to contribute our unique talents, whether through art, advocacy, or simply raising our voices, to the collective struggle for fairness. In applying these lessons to our current lives, we are reminded that the challenges we face, whether personal or societal, are not insurmountable. By embracing our creativity, nurturing empathy, and demonstrating unwavering courage, we can contribute to a world where justice is not just an ideal, but a lived reality. Let Marcus's journey be a source of inspiration. In the face of adversity, hold fast to your dreams, use your talents to speak your truth, and never underestimate the power of a single voice to spark a revolution. As we close this chapter on a story of profound transformation and renewal, I invite you to join our community in continuing to explore these themes of hope, resilience, and justice. You found Marcus's journey as inspiring as it is humbling. Please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support not only helps us bring you more stories that delve into the human experience with depth and honesty, but it also fuels our mission to shed light on the challenges and triumphs that shape our world. By subscribing, you become part of a movement that believes in the transformative power of truth and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Let's walk this journey together, one story at a time, as we strive to make our voices heard and our lives more just and compassionate. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for joining us in this quest for a brighter tomorrow.